a young woman arriving at a community music workshop on a warm afternoon. The workshop was held inside a local hall where anyone could walk in and share their talent. Most people were excited, chatting loudly, tuning their instruments or practicing small melodies. But she was different. She quietly entered through the side door, holding a faded keyboard bag that had clearly been used for years. She looked around for a moment, unsure if she was in the right place, and then slowly moved toward an empty chair in the corner. People noticed her, but not in a kind way. Some were curious, others uninterested. She sat silently, observing everyone while they prepared. She didn't rush. She didn't try to impress anyone. She simply unzipped her old bag and carefully lifted out her keyboard, gently placing it on her lap as if it meant the world to her. The instrument wasn't new or shiny. A few buttons were scratched and the color had faded from long use. But she held it with respect, as if she trusted it more than anything else. Across the room sat a man known for his confidence and strong personality. He had performed at many events and liked to call himself one of the best in the city. He wore a stylish jacket, had a new digital keyboard in front of him, and clearly enjoyed the attention people gave him. When he saw her sitting quietly with her old instrument, he raised an eyebrow. Without trying to hide it, he leaned closer to the person next to him and whispered something about her keyboard looking like it came from another decade. The person beside him laughed softly, and that small reaction made him feel even more sure of himself. She didn't hear the comment. Or maybe she did but chose not to show it. She kept adjusting her instrument, checking the keys one by one, making sure everything worked. Her hands were calm, but her eyes carried a seriousness that not many people noticed. She had come here for a purpose, even if nobody understood it yet. The workshop leader soon stood in front of the group and explained how the session would go. Everyone would get a chance to play anything they wanted. It didn't have to be perfect. The goal was to share. Most participants nodded confidently. Some even smirked, already planning to show off their skills. The confident man across the room leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed, ready to judge every person who touched an instrument. When it was time to write down names for the performance order, she quietly walked to the table and wrote her name without saying a word. A few people watched her walk, noticing the slight hesitation in her steps, which they mistook as lack of confidence. The workshop leader smiled politely at her, but the confident man looked at her with doubt in his eyes. He didn't even try to hide it. After she returned to her seat, the room continued buzzing with activity. Some played loud warm-up chords just to be heard. Others discussed their favorite techniques. A few participants even gathered around the confident man, asking him for tips. He gave advice loudly, making sure everyone in the room could hear how knowledgeable he was. Every time he spoke, he glanced at her, as if reminding himself and everyone else that he was the star of the workshop and she was just someone who brought an outdated keyboard. She didn't react. Not once. She kept her focus on her instrument, taking long breaths, occasionally closing her eyes as if trying to connect with something inside her. It was clear she wasn't nervous. She was preparing in her own quiet way. As people continued preparing, the confident man leaned back and whispered again to the person beside him. He said she probably didn't know how to perform and might end up embarrassing herself. The person beside him tried not to laugh too loudly, but the doubt had already spread. A few others who heard the comment glanced at her with the same skeptical look, wondering if she was truly ready or if she was just wasting a performance slot, but she didn't let any of that reach her. She had learned long ago that silence is sometimes louder than reaction. She focused only on her breathing, her keyboard, and the small memory of the promise she had made to herself before coming here. She wasn't here to compete. She wasn't here to impress. She was here to share the music that lived inside her. The music she had spent years developing in quiet rooms where no one ever came to watch. As the workshop leader explained more rules and encouraged everyone to support each other, people nodded casually. But many were still more excited to showcase their own talent than to listen to others. The confident man particularly seemed ready to dominate the room. He sat tall, adjusting his jacket, warming up his fingers dramatically, hoping someone would compliment his technique. Some did. Their attention only fed his ego more. Meanwhile, she looked at the keys of her keyboard as if each one carried a story. Her fingers brushed over them lightly. She seemed to be remembering something, perhaps a routine she had practiced 1,000 times, or maybe a performance she had never gotten a chance to give. Her breathing steadied even more. Her shoulders relaxed. There was a softness on her face that looked peaceful, far from the stress most performers felt. The workshop leader called the room to order and explained that the first few performers would be chosen randomly. Everyone sat up straighter. Some adjusted their clothes, some fixed their posture, and a few suddenly became nervous. Even the confident man sat forward, expecting to be among the first chosen. But when the first few names were read, she wasn't one of them. Instead, she watched the others go ahead. Some played well, some struggled. The confident man judged every performance silently, nodding only when he approved, shaking his head when he didn't. She listened with genuine attention. She smiled when someone played well. She admired the courage of those who made mistakes but kept going. She wasn't comparing herself to them. She appreciated each effort, even when others made jokes or whispered small criticisms. Hours went by. Performers played one after another. Snacks were passed around. People moved about, stretched, chatted, or whispered. But she stayed in her seat most of the time, silently practicing small finger movements, barely pressing the keys. She wasn't impatient. She wasn't anxious. She was simply waiting. By the time half the list was completed, the confident man had already formed a clear opinion about her. He told someone sitting near him that she didn't look like someone who practiced seriously. He guessed she was probably self-taught and would likely play something basic and unimpressive. Every time he spoke, he acted as if his opinion was absolute truth. People listened, which only made him more sure. Finally, as the workshop leader prepared the next set of performers, he called out her name. The room didn't react loudly, just a quiet shift of attention. But the confident man looked directly at her with clear doubt. He leaned forward, crossed his arms even tighter, and waited with an expression that said he was ready to be proven right. She stood slowly, carrying her keyboard with both hands. Her steps were gentle but steady. The room wasn't cheering for her, but many were watching with curiosity, wondering what she would do with that old instrument. She walked toward the front, and the confident man smirked. He thought the moment he had been expecting was finally here, the moment she would show she wasn't good enough, but he didn't know her. He didn't know her story, her practice, her passion, or the power she carried in her fingertips. He didn't know that one single note from her would soon change everything. The moment she finally reaches the front of the room, the hall suddenly feels quieter, not because people are giving her respect, but because many are curious to see what she will do. A few are still whispering among themselves, wondering why she even signed up. The confident man sits with a smug expression, waiting for her to make a mistake he can later talk about. His arms are crossed, and he leans slightly forward, as if judging her before she's even played a single note. She gently places her old keyboard on the table arranged for performers. The table shakes slightly, and for a second her keyboard tilts, but she quickly steadies it with both hands. Even that small moment makes some people exchange looks, as if they already see it as a sign she isn't prepared. She notices their reactions but doesn't let it affect her. She has dealt with doubt many times before, and she has learned to stay calm through all of it. She plugs in the cable carefully and flicks the power switch. The old screen lights up in a dull, faded glow. It's clear the keyboard has lived a long life, maybe longer than anyone expected. The confident man sees this and smirks again, shaking his head slightly. He whispers something to the person next to him, who tries not to laugh. But she ignores them. She adjusts the volume knob, presses a few keys gently to check the sound, and takes a deep breath. For a moment, nothing else exists for her. Not the people watching, not the whispers, not the judgments. She closes her eyes and tries to center herself. The room feels big and heavy, filled with eyes waiting to see her fail or surprise them. She knows this feeling too well, the pressure, the expectation, the fear. But she also knows the peace that comes right before playing, the calm that takes over when her fingers touch the keys. The workshop leader gives her a small nod. signaling that she can begin whenever she's ready. She opens her eyes slowly. Her fingers hover just above the keys, as if they need a second to remember the path they've walked 1,000 times before. She takes one more deep breath. Just as she's about to play, someone at the back coughs loudly. It's not intentional, but it breaks the moment a little. A few people giggle quietly. The confident man raises his eyebrows again, as if the universe itself is giving signs that she's not ready. She doesn't react. She waits for the noise to settle, then gently places her fingers back on the keyboard. She hesitates for a tiny moment, only because she wants the first note to be right. She knows how important beginnings are. They can change the energy of a whole room, and she can feel that this room needs a change. As her hands rest on the keys, she notices that they're trembling slightly. She tries to steady them by pressing her fingertips softly against the keys. She whispers something to herself, not words anyone can hear, just a quiet reminder that she's ready, even if the world doubts her. And even though her hands shake a little, her eyes carry determination. Deep inside, she knows what she came here to do. The confident man notices the tremble and smiles as if he has won something. He is certain she's nervous, that she will fumble the moment she starts. He leans further forward, waiting for the first mistake, but then something happens. The room, which had been filled with whispers and small sounds, begins to settle. People stop moving around. The snacks are put aside. Even the workshop leader remains still, sensing the moment growing heavier. It's not respect, at least not yet, but a kind of curiosity mixed with expectation. The air feels tight, almost like the pause right before a storm. She notices the silence, but instead of feeling scared, she feels a small wave of courage rise inside her. Sometimes silence can be intimidating, but sometimes silence is a space given to someone who is about to prove something. And she feels that this silence, even if unintentional, is opening a door for her. Her back straightens. Her breathing becomes slow and controlled. She closes her eyes again, not because she's afraid to look at the audience, but because she wants to feel the keys. She wants to hear the music inside her before she lets it out. She thinks about all the times she practiced alone in a small room where no one ever came to watch. All the nights she stayed awake learning pieces by listening instead of reading music sheets. All the days she spent creating her own melodies without anyone to guide her. All the moments she imagined what it would feel like to share her music with people who didn't know her story. She hasn't spoken a word since reaching the front, but somehow her silence tells its own story. There is something about her presence, soft yet steady, that makes even the confident man shift slightly in his seat. He doesn't understand why, but something about her calmness begins to bother him. People who doubt others often fear those who don't fear anything. Finally, she presses her fingertips down just enough to feel the cold surface of the keys, not enough to make sound. She holds them there for a second, grounding herself. And then, gently, she lifts her fingers again. She's almost ready. The audience shifts closer, almost unconsciously. The confident man leans forward even more, his eyes locked on her hands. A few people at the back stand to get a better view. The air feels thicker than before. Just before she starts, her right hand trembles again. It's a small movement, but clear enough for some people to notice. A few eyebrows rise. Someone in the second row tilts their head. The confident man smirks, thinking she's already losing control, but inside her the tremble isn't fear. It's energy. It's the weight of everything she's ever felt, everything she's worked for, everything she's about to show. Her body carries the pressure, but her mind knows exactly what it wants to do. She places her hands back on the keys for the last time. She takes in a slow breath through her nose, then lets it out softly. The room feels so quiet now that people can hear the small click of the keyboard buttons, and even the sound of her breath. The confident man expects her to rush, to panic, to make a mistake. But she doesn't. She waits until the room is completely still. She waits until she feels that special silence, the silence that feels like the world is listening, even when it isn't. Then she opens her eyes. And they're different now. No hesitation, no doubt. Her eyes carry the calm of someone who has walked through storms alone and learned how to stand strong afterward. They carry the strength of someone who doesn't need applause or approval to know her worth. They carry the quiet power of someone who has practiced not to impress others, but to express everything that lives inside her heart. She looks at the keyboard, and then she lifts her head slightly, as if acknowledging the room for the first time. She doesn't smile. She doesn't speak. She simply exists in that moment fully, with all the confidence she had hidden until now, and just like that, she presses the first key. A single note is all she aims for. One clear, strong note. The note that will decide what happens next. The note that will change everything that has been whispered, judged, assumed, and misunderstood about her dot as her finger comes down. The entire room holds its breath, not knowing that what they are about to hear will freeze them in place. She presses the key, and the sound begins. The moment her finger touched the first key, the entire room felt different. It wasn't just a sound, it was something deeper, something that slipped quietly into every corner of the hall. The note was warm, clear, and strangely emotional. It was the kind of sound that didn't come from a new or expensive instrument. It came from someone who had lived with music for a long time, someone who understood its heart. The room went still. Completely still. People who had been whispering, shifting in their seats, or scrolling on their phones suddenly froze. Even the workshop leader, who had seen hundreds of performances, felt a small shock run through him. He looked up sharply, surprised by how powerful the very first note sounded. And then came the reaction from the confident man, the one who had doubted her since the moment she walked in. His smirk vanished instantly. It was almost funny how fast his expression changed. His eyebrows lifted, his eyes widened slightly, and he leaned even closer without realizing it. He hadn't expected this. Not even a little. She didn't notice his reaction. She wasn't looking at anyone. She kept her eyes closed, letting her fingers move from that first note into the next. And the next. Each sound flowed into the room like a small story. Soft at first, then rising gently, almost like breathing. She wasn't playing loudly. She wasn't trying to show off. But somehow, the quietness of her music made it even more powerful. It made people lean in, as if the melody demanded attention without raising its voice. Her fingers moved naturally, like they knew exactly where to go. There were no signs of hesitation now. The tremble that had been in her hands earlier was gone, replaced by a calm confidence that came from deep inside her. Her body relaxed as she played. Her shoulders dropped. Her face softened. It was clear she wasn't performing for the room, she was simply sharing something that had lived in her for years. The melody she played didn't sound like any famous song. It wasn't something people had heard on the radio. It was her own creation, shaped over long hours of practice when no one was watching. And that made it even more special. It wasn't perfect in a technical sense, but it was honest. Every note felt like it carried a little piece of her life. People in the room felt that honesty. They didn't know why, but the music made them imagine things, memories, moments, hopes. Some thought of peaceful mornings. Others remembered times they had made mistakes and learned from them. The melody didn't tell them what to feel. It simply opened something inside them. Even the confident man, who usually judged people harshly, felt something shift. He tried to keep his arms crossed, but at some point he uncrossed them without realizing. His posture changed. His face softened. He wasn't judging anymore. He was listening, really listening for the first time that day. The workshop leader glanced around the room. He noticed something unusual. Every single person was quiet. No one was distracted. No one was whispering. No one was thinking about their own performance. All eyes were on her, but in a respectful, almost mesmerized way. She continued to play, moving into a deeper part of the melody. Her hands became more expressive, her fingers gliding across the keys with confidence. The sound grew a little louder, filled with strength and emotion. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't complicated. But it was beautiful in a simple, real way. At one point, she paused for half a second between notes. A tiny pause. But even that small moment felt meaningful, like the room collectively held its breath. It was the kind of moment that reminded people why music mattered. not because of technique, but because of feeling, and then she continued, picking up the melody again, this time with a sense of determination. The music carried a quiet power, as if she was telling everyone in the room, I may have walked in quietly, but I didn't come here empty. Some people in the audience felt goosebumps rise on their arms. Others felt a warmth in their chest, the kind that comes when something unexpected touches the heart. A few even exchanged quick glances, silently asking each other, where did this come from? But no one spoke. No one dared to break the moment. Her music began to rise gently, forming a wave of sound that filled the entire hall. She didn't need a fancy keyboard. She didn't need a big stage. All she needed was her passion, and every person in the room felt it. The confident man, who had been so sure she would fail, felt his pride crumble just a little. He wasn't jealous. He was simply amazed, confused even. He had spent so much time trying to impress others that he had forgotten what it felt like to be moved by someone else's talent. He watched her fingers carefully, noticing how effortlessly they moved. There were no dramatic gestures, no exaggerated expressions, just pure focus and feeling. It made him realize that confidence doesn't always come from being loud or being seen. Sometimes it comes from years of quiet work that no one else witnesses. She played a softer section next, almost like a whisper. The sound dipped gently, like calm water. People leaned forward instinctively, wanting to catch every detail. Some held their breath. The silence in the room wasn't forced. It was natural, born from admiration. Her melody then shifted again, rising with a hopeful, almost uplifting tone. It sounded like someone finding their voice after a long time of being quiet. It sounded like walking out of darkness into soft light. It sounded like courage, and as she played that hopeful part, something changed in her posture. She sat taller. Her hands moved with more certainty. Her body leaned into the music like she was finally letting go of all the doubt she had kept inside for years. People watched this transformation happen in real time. They could feel her confidence growing through the sound. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life, waiting to show the world a part of herself she rarely revealed. Even the workshop leader felt emotional. He had seen many good performers, many talented musicians, but very few who could shift the energy of an entire room with just a simple keyboard and a quiet presence. Her music gradually slowed, moving into a final, gentle section. People sensed the ending approaching, and they almost didn't want it to end. But she played the last few notes with the same honesty she had from the beginning. She didn't rush. She didn't try to impress at the end. She just let the melody come to a soft, peaceful close. The final note lingered in the air for a few seconds, almost like it didn't want to leave the room. And during that moment, no one moved. Not even the confident man. Everyone sat frozen in place, feeling a mixture of awe, respect, and surprise. She lifted her hands from the keyboard slowly. Her eyes opened. She took a small, calm breath, and in that breath, the entire room finally realized what had just happened. A girl they doubted. A girl they underestimated. A girl they barely noticed when she walked in had just silenced them all with nothing more than her first note and the truth in her music. The room remained frozen, unable to react yet, still processing what they had heard, and the confident man. For a few long seconds after she played the final note, the room stayed completely silent. It wasn't the awkward silence that follows a weak performance, nor the forced silence people create to be polite. This silence was different. It was the kind of silence that comes when something unexpected, something deeply moving has just happened. People didn't know how to react because they were still processing what they had felt. She slowly lifted her hands from the keyboard and placed them gently in her lap. Her breathing was calm, almost peaceful, as if she had finally shared something she had kept inside her for a very long time. She didn't smile proudly. She didn't look around to check people's reactions. She simply looked down for a moment, as if grateful to her instrument for guiding her through the performance. The workshop leader blinked a few times, trying to come back to reality. He had seen many performers over the years, but rarely had he witnessed a moment where a single note and a simple melody could change the atmosphere of a room so completely. He opened his mouth to speak, but stopped. Something about the moment told him to wait. The first person to break the silence wasn't the workshop leader. It wasn't the people in the front row. It wasn't the group who had laughed earlier. It was someone near the back, someone who had barely paid attention the entire workshop. That person slowly began to clap softly at first, almost unsure if it was the right moment. But the sound of those few claps floated through the room like a spark, and then everything happened at once. Clap, clap, clap. The sound spread. People who had been frozen suddenly sat up straighter. A couple of them stood. More hands came together. The soft clapping grew louder, fuller, stronger, until the entire hall was filled with applause. Not the polite kind. Not the forced kind. Real applause, honest, heartfelt, full of respect. Some people even looked surprised at themselves for clapping so loudly. They hadn't expected to feel this way. They hadn't expected to be moved by someone they had doubted just an hour earlier. The workshop leader finally found his voice and joined in, clapping with genuine admiration. His eyes were slightly shiny, as if he had been holding back emotion. But the most surprising reaction came from the confident man. He didn't clap at first. Not because he didn't want to, but because he was too stunned to move. He sat there, staring at her with a completely different expression than he had earlier. There was no smirk, no judgment, no arrogance. His face carried something new, respect mixed with disbelief. After a moment, he stood up. And when he did, people around him paused. They waited to see what he would do. He slowly brought his hands together and began clapping too. But his claps were different from everyone else's. They were louder, more deliberate, almost as if he wanted her to hear them clearly. He wasn't clapping out of politeness. He was clapping because he genuinely couldn't ignore what she had just done. She finally lifted her head to look at the audience. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw everyone standing and clapping. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't used to applause. Her lips parted just a little, not into a full smile, but into a soft, surprised expression. She looked almost shy in that moment, like someone who had accidentally stepped into the spotlight without expecting it. The workshop leader walked toward her, still clapping, and mouthed the words, "That was beautiful." She nodded lightly in response. Still overwhelmed by the reaction, people began to murmur softly among themselves, praising her, wondering where she learned to play, talking about how unexpected her performance was. Some even said they felt something emotional during her melody. The room was buzzing with admiration. The confident man who had once doubted her took a deep breath and stepped forward. His footsteps were slow, thoughtful. People around him watched him walk, curious about what he was going to say. For the first time all day, he didn't look like someone who wanted attention. He looked like someone who had been humbled. He approached her with a sincerity that no one had seen from him before. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't perform for the audience. He simply looked at her and said in a quiet, honest voice, "I underestimated you completely and I was wrong." His words weren't dramatic. They weren't rehearsed. They were simple, but they carried weight. She looked at him for a moment, surprised not just by his apology, but by the humility in his tone. She didn't respond right away. She just looked at him with calm eyes. He continued, "That was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. You didn't just play music. You made the whole room feel something." People around them listened, some nodding. It wasn't often that someone with his personality admitted something like this, especially in front of others. She smiled, then soft, almost shy, but warm. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice matched the softness of her music. "I'm glad it reached you." Her simple response somehow made the moment even more powerful. She wasn't proud, she wasn't showing off, she wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just honest. The workshop leader joined them and asked her where she had learned to play. She told him she had taught herself at home, practicing for years on that same old keyboard. She explained how she never had formal lessons, how she learned by listening and feeling rather than reading notes. The workshop leader shook his head in amazement, saying he had never seen someone play with such natural emotion. Others gathered around her too. asking questions, praising her, telling her how much they enjoyed the performance. For the first time, she wasn't sitting alone. She wasn't ignored. She wasn't doubted. People wanted to know her story, that the confident man remained close by, not in a dominating way, but in a respectful one. He listened as others spoke to her. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to take any attention away. Instead, he stood slightly behind her, as if protecting the moment she had created. After the crowd calmed a little, he gently asked, "Will you play again sometime?" "I'd like to hear more." She looked at him, then at her keyboard, and nodded. "Maybe," she replied. "Music always finds its moment." He smiled, not the confident smile he used earlier, but a humble one. A real one. As the workshop leader prepared for the next performer, he told the audience, "Let's take a short break after that performance. I think we all need a moment." People laughed softly, agreeing. It was true, her melody had left a mark on them. As she slowly packed her keyboard, one of the participants came up to her and said, "When you played that first note, it felt like everything stopped." "I've never felt something like that." She paused before zipping her bag and replied, "Music has a way of finding hearts when words don't." The person nodded deeply, understanding more than they expected. Before leaving the stage area, she glanced around the hall. It looked different now. Not because anything had changed physically, but because she felt seen. Not as someone with an old keyboard. Not as someone quiet and overlooked. But as someone who had shared a piece of her soul, and in return, received something she never expected. Respect. As she walked back to her seat, the confident man stepped aside to give her space. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. His earlier apology already held enough meaning. She sat down quietly, placing her keyboard beside her. People still looked at her with admiration, but she didn't seek their attention. She simply folded her hands in her lap and took a deep breath. Grounding herself again. In her heart, she knew something important had happened that day. She didn't change the world. She didn't win a competition. But she changed a room. She changed a moment. And she changed someone's mind, not by arguing, not by proving anything with words, but by letting her music speak for her. And sometimes, that's all it takes. One honest note, one real moment, one quiet person, showing the world who they truly are. The room eventually returned to normal. But the memory of her performance stayed with everyone who sat there, even the confident man, who had come in believing he was the best, walked away feeling different, not defeated, not embarrassed, but wiser. He learned that talent doesn't always arrive with loud steps or shiny instruments. Sometimes it arrives quietly, gently, and changes everything the moment it speaks. And as she left the workshop later that evening, carrying her old keyboard once again, she didn't walk out feeling small. She walked out knowing that her music had finally reached the world, starting with one note that froze an entire room.